Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Garret Nowell from Independent Stave Company. He is the Director of Log Procurement at Independent Stave. If I'm not mistaken, Independent Stave is the biggest...
the largest barrel manufacturer in the world.
So Garret has been with ISC for a few years. I think before that you were working with American Stave in Mississippi and were a consultant, a wildlife biology and forestry consultant, and has a long history of work in the forestry field. He's an accomplished forester and advocate of sustainable forestry. He heads up the team there at ISC. I think of 24 or more buyers.
24 log buyers across 20 states.
And we're going to hear about that and some of the wood chemistry dimensions and some of the new kind of products they're developing and bringing to market from Missouri white oak and the Cooperage industry. So thanks to Garret Nowell.
All right, thank you. I do. Is it not up here high enough? I'm pretty loud already without it, but I'll talk a little louder. Okay. So, like he said, I work with Independent Stave Company. We are the largest barrel manufacturer in the world, serve more than 40 countries. So when most people think about a barrel company, they think about just strictly barrels, but we also have other departments and things that we do just besides make barrels. Of course, we make the barrels for the spirits, like whiskey, bourbon, tequila, even for Tabasco sauce, for wine, for all kinds of things, not just for the original thought that comes to your mind, the whiskey and the wine, but various other products. We also have another company called KBB, Kentucky Bourbon Barrel, which is a second-hand barrel manufacturer that goes for those secondary markets such as scotch, even tequilas and beers and all those different kinds of things. So we try to go from beginning to end, every aspect. We also have what we call an Oak Alternatives. It's called our Oak Solutions Group, and we'll kind of get to that here at the end a little bit. Missouri Mulch, right here down the road in New Florence, Missouri. We've got a large mulch facility. We take advantage of all the bark and chips that we make while we're cutting up staves to make another byproduct. And then, of course, our staves and heading that we ship around the world and make barrels in other countries. So we also have facilities in other countries, and I'll get into that as well. So we're family owned, over 100 years. Our company started in 1912. It's been in the Boswell family from the beginning. We started right here in Missouri. Like we said, we have a global presence, and we're also community focused. We want not only our company to succeed, but the communities that we're in. And Missouri's been an extremely important community. Even this school right here, the last two Boswells that have been the CEOs of the company have both graduated from engineering school at Mizzou. So over the 40 countries that we serve, we've got 9 facilities here in the U.S. We actually, our 9th one's being built right now, so we have 8 of them listed. 3 of them are in the state of Missouri. So we have a Cooperage, that's where we actually make the barrel, and then 2 stave mills where we cut up the wood that we turn into barrels. So why white oak? Why is it important for our needs, our uses in a barrel? The number one component is what you see listed here, that taloses. And what you see right over here, these little pockets that are inside of the wood, inside of these growth rings. So white oak is unique because it has more taloses than any other. And what that taloses does, it actually, the pores for the nutrients, the food that goes up and down the trees, after they're done growing, they actually close liquid tight, making that barrel leak-proof, which is extremely important when you have expensive product inside of it. The other reason is its physical characteristics. Of course, it's able, when it's heated, it's more pliable. You can bend it and shape it into the barrels that we like. And then for the physical characteristics from a taste profile, it has those vanillas, those toasts, those spices, those lignans in there that break down that you can alter to make so many different types of flavors and profiles. So the number one reason that we're using this, or the secondary reason that we're using this, is also a federal law that's required to be considered bourbon. And, you know, all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. It's because of this federal law that it has to be put in a new American oak charred barrel for it to be considered bourbon. So that's one of the other requirements of why we have to make so many barrels to replenish all those great bourbons that you're seeing out there over the last 10 years that has really seen a boom in it. And people really getting interested in the taste and the profiles because everything's a little bit different. We don't just make a number 1 through 4 char barrel anymore. We do literally tens of thousands of different profiles that you can even imagine. So where does the white oak come from? So Missouri is the number 1 state, number 1 producer of white oak for us, for the industry, for anybody that's looking for white oak, we're in the right state. And that's, of course, why we're also headquartered here. And so New Florence, our stave mill in New Florence is the largest stave mill in the world. So our second largest in Kentucky, that's our second largest state. So it's an important state to us, to say the least. So he told you earlier that I had 24 buyers. If you compare the two here, the two maps, so this is where the white oak grows. You can see Missouri right here. The Ozarks is one of the most renowned regions for white oak in the wine and spirit industry because of its slow growth. Now, when you walk out there, it's mostly rocks and poor soil, but it makes really slow growth timber and really fine grain. It's great for flavor profiles. So it's not great if you want to grow trees fast, but it's great for us from the cooperage industry on extracting those flavors and the high demand for it. And like we said, our buying network. So I've got our 6 stave mills where we actually process the wood before we turn it into a barrel mapped out. And you can kind of see we have a circle that we go in through these states to be able to provide it. And Missouri being concentrated and heavy. So white oak consumption, what does that look like? So about 17% of the forest in the eastern hardwood is white oak. Here in Missouri, it's closer to 25% of it. So of that 17%, about 11 to 15% actually ends up in the cooperage industry. So you're talking about 2 to 3% of the forest that we get to utilize, that we're paying that higher value, that added value on normal products like ties, lumber, cabinetry, all those different things that you see wood, flooring that's used. So we've talked about white oak, why we use it in a barrel. What are some different things that we do, the value added side of it? Now, of course, we're always not just doing value added on products that aren't a barrel, but even within our barrel, whether it's extracting different flavors, trying different types of cuts and wood and all different things you couldn't imagine. We're going to get into the oak solutions group side of it, which is 3 things we're going to discuss: chips, cubes, and tank staves. So what chips are, we've got a convection oven, which chips can be put inside of. This one over here to the right is actually, it's just an old large-scale coffee roaster that we have, of course, engineered, altered, changed to use for wood chips and cubes, and also our continuous roaster. So we can do a lot of different things with this wood that we can make actually different from inside of a barrel. So when you think about a barrel and the reasons that we've got limitations that we can do with that barrel because of temperature restrictions, because it still has to be pliable, it still has to be bendable. If you overcharge, it'll break, it'll overdry, it'll do those things. But with things like alternatives, we can extract so much more different flavors because we can get the temperature much hotter. We can do it much quicker. We can do it much slower. We can do it over a 24-hour period. So it makes the flavor profiles and the things that you pull out of it a lot different. So there's 3 kinds of chips that we use. We've got a large chip, a small chip, and a powder. Now, all of this has to do with surface area and what you want to come out on the other end. So basically this powder, this sawdust that you see, is almost like a powder. It's just adding tannins to it. It basically disappears inside of it. And the majority of these chips are used in the wine industry. Alternatives altogether, the majority are used in the wine industry. But it's becoming more popular in other departments, such as the whiskeys, the bourbons, the tequilas. They're just newer to the game with it. So what do we do to get these chips, these tank staves, all these different things into a product that we can change and alter the flavor in? So again, we're still using white oak with these that specific tree type when we're making chips, tank staves, and cubes. So there's a convection oven. It's essentially the same oven that you use at your house, except it's a giant 20-foot one that you slide a row of tank staves inside, and you can cook for 24 hours or 12 hours at various temperatures and at various rates. They can be infrared, they can be oven toasted, all kinds of different things. The infrared toaster is a sheet that's laid down, and they go down and back, essentially, and are flipped from one end to the other. Then the fire toaster. So when you think of a bourbon barrel, that fire that shoots up right through the middle of it. So this is made for tank staves. You can see it that's hanging right here. So our engineers created this to where it'll rotate around it. Now we're not actually charring in something like this. It's for our toasting, which we do for our wine barrels as well. And then we actually did create this char method as well. So a tank stave is about 36 inches long and about a 1/4 inch thick. So if you can imagine, it's really hard to char a piece of wood like that without actually catching on fire and burning up. So we created a method to do it inside of our cooperage in Missouri and Lebanon. So the tank staves come in different sizes. So this right here is just our original tank stave that goes inside of one. We do them in batches. Say it goes inside of a large vat container for wine or whatever it may be. They're essentially turned into tea bags also, different long socks that go inside. And these cubes are something new that we created within the last year and a half and that we're still working with and trying to see what we can extract. So those are something that's been exciting and new for us. And one of the other things that when we look at all of our products, you see these products right here, the alternatives, the Missouri mulch, we don't have any waste. Everything that we use comes out into some type of product, whether it turns into a product that we use inside of a barrel, or a product that we use in landscaping, or a product that turns into charcoal, a product that turns into energy. We use our own sawdust and chips to also run our dry kilns. So we're self-sufficient in that manner. And then finally, this is kind of a list of all the countries and places that we have sales groups in. And if anybody's got questions about anything, I'll be glad to see if I can help. I know I rushed through that because we were a little behind.
Thank you, Garret. Yeah, we have some time for some questions, so please, hopefully, any comments or questions? Oh, I see way in the back.
That's a great question.
Okay. So, can you repeat your question? How's the white oak supply looking?
Sure. So we've actually got more volume of white oak than we've ever had. And that can be said of most of the hardwood in general. Just what you're seeing right here, we use 100% of the wood. But it's not just us, it's other industries. The reason that we're growing more of it than we did in the past because we're more efficient with it. We require less of the wood out there because we can turn more of the wood that we do cut down into something else. Now, with that being said, I'm also on a committee that's called the White Oak Initiative. Now, the biggest long-term concern is yes, we've got more volume, and this is specifically for white oak in the oak hickory forest than we've ever had in the saw timber size, the big trees, the 14, 15, the bigger ones up that we use and the industry uses wide. And then we've got a supply of the smaller trees, the 0 to 5 inch, but where we've got a gap of the 5 to 10 inch where we don't have as much of that as we used to. And the age distribution is starting to be skewed. Now, it's not a problem necessarily today, and that may not be a problem in the next 40 to 50, but it's starting to look like that. So we started this initiative, this program, to make sure that we educate people that it's important that we're out there managing these forests for that specifically. We got to have all these age classes because we don't want to run out of bourbon in 40 years if we don't have the right kind of trees to cut when we come out there because it's vitally important to it. But it's not just us, like we said, other industries that it's extremely important to. Good question. Yes.
So I sure don't want to run out of bourbon. Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, at the beginning, I think you touched on this a little bit, that you can formulate things in a million ways. So what kinds of things are you doing since there seems to be an unlimited expansion of different flavors and profiles of bourbons and liquors and whiskeys? Sure. And so what are you doing in terms of understanding, white oak chemistry to play with that whole thing?
Yes. So we actually have chemists and food scientists that work with us that are on our payroll that analyze those kind of things all the time. And of course, we have multiple distilleries, clients that come to us on a daily basis and ask for all kinds of crazy things to be done. But we also work with schools just like this, Mizzou. We work with the Natural Resource Department here on designing some of that. We work with departments in Kentucky. I mean, we're all the time researching, trying to develop those new ways that we can not only make new profiles, but be more consistent in what we produce. I mean, we want to make the same product the same way every time because they want that bourbon, that wine, whatever it is, to have that same characteristic every time you make it. A little product called Maker's 46, that's one that uses tank staves in it. It's got 10 tank staves, 10 French oak tank staves that are in there for 9 weeks. We have a new product that we just created for them this year, the R6, which is kind of hard to find, which some of these nicer bourbons can be. So we're looking at things like that all the time. It's not necessarily new ways to use white oak as far as cutting it up in outside of the industry, but within the cooperage industry and profiles. I said all the right stuff. Anyone have any questions?
I do have a question in that case. Like I was looking around. So Is there any issues you foresee in the future regarding the climate change and the possibility that you will not have white oak growing there? They grow now, and does the white oak initiative address that issue of regenerating or planting white oak in places where it might grow in 100 years? You know, planted here today, and then so you have the
Yes,
supply
no,
later on.
absolutely. That's part of the concern of it. You know, one of the things that's specific to being able to use it in our industry is that tyloses. So you saw on the map of ours, white oak grows a lot of different places that we don't reach out and go to. The reason that is, if it grows too fast, it doesn't form that tyloses inside of it, and then it makes all the whiskey fall on the floor, which makes everybody sad. So we don't usually go to those territories in mind. With things like climate change that are a long-term concern, if that shift changes, then how do we adapt? Do we have to go one way or the other? You know, because it's using something else. I promise we've tried every kind of woodage you could imagine over the past 100+ years to make a barrel out of, see if it works the same, and it doesn't. But yes, that is part of the white oak initiative.
How do you address it?
Excellent question. So, I mean, the biggest thing that we're doing is protecting what we've got and where we have it. You know, most people look at managing their timber as, I'm going to leave it out there forever and just not touch it because they like the way it looks, in which that's a perfectly applicable way for people to manage their timber. But for the long-term health of the forest and for the rest of the markets in general, if we're not out there harvesting timber like we were 60, 70, 100 years ago, you got to imagine we were settling in all these areas. There was large-scale, you know, fires. There was large-scale clearings that created these forests that we have now a couple hundred years ago. I mean, our barrel age, the wood that's inside of it, averages 100 years old. So what is that going to look like in the next 100 years if we're not in the woods doing what we used to do? We no longer use fire like we used to use. We no longer massively harvest areas like we used to do. Now, I'm not saying we should go out there and cut a bunch of trees down by any means, but practical, sustainable management that not only helps landowners, it helps communities because it's providing a wood source and more jobs, but it also helps the industry and the forest health in the long run. Good?
Well, thank you, Garret. Yeah, and thanks for your questions.
Thank you all.